My stepsister mocked my career until she needed a job from me. I still remember the exact moment I realized my stepsister had spent years rooting against me, not because she ever admitted it, because she smiled every single time something went wrong in my life. If I lost an opportunity, she'd call it a learning experience. If she got praised for something, she'd somehow bring up my failures before dessert was even served. Looking back now, I should have seen where it was heading. But at the time, I kept convincing myself, that's just how siblings are. Turns out, I was giving her way too much credit. For context, I'm 29 and I work in digital marketing. Specifically, I help businesses grow online through branding, advertising, and content strategy. It's not exactly the kind of career that impresses older relatives. Whenever someone asked what I did, I'd start explaining. Halfway through my sentence, they'd already be nodding politely with that expression people wear when they don't understand a single word. My stepmother was the worst. So, you just sit on a computer all day, pretty much. And people actually pay you for that? Yes, she'd laugh like I'd just told the funniest joke she'd heard all week. Then she'd turn toward my stepsister, Melissa. Melissa worked in corporate finance. Now, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with finance. But according to my family, Melissa wasn't just successful. She was practically royalty. Every family dinner turned into the Melissa appreciation ceremony. Melissa got a raise. Melissa bought designer shoes. Melissa went on another business trip. Melissa's boss said she had leadership potential. Meanwhile, I'd mentioned landing a huge client worth more than my yearly salary 5 years earlier, and someone would ask me to pass the mashed potatoes. After a while, I stopped talking about work altogether. It was easier, less exhausting. Melissa, however, never stopped talking. She had this habit of disguising insults as concern. You still freelance? Actually, I own an agency now. Oh, that's nice. Then she'd tilt her head. So when are you planning to get a real office? I did have an office. She just refused to believe anyone could run a successful business without wearing a suit every day. One Thanksgiving, she looked around the table and asked, "So, does anyone actually understand what they do?" She pointed directly at me. Everyone laughed. Even my stepmother nearly spilled her drink. I smiled. Because sometimes pretending something doesn't hurt is easier than admitting it does inside. I wanted to leave. But my dad gave me that look, the one that silently says, "Please don't make this awkward." So I stayed. That became the pattern. Every birthday, every holiday, every barbecue, Melissa found a new way to remind everyone that her career mattered. And mine was basically a hobby. When I bought my first house, she called it cute. When I bought a second property as an investment, she asked if I was renting it through one of those vacation apps. When I hired my 5th employee, she said, "I didn't know freelancers hired assistants." I corrected her. "Employees," she shrugged. Same thing, no matter what happened. She always managed to shrink my accomplishments into something that sounded temporary. Like I was one bad month away from moving back into my childhood bedroom. The funny part, she had never once asked what my company actually did. Not once. She just assumed. Because in her mind, working online couldn't possibly be a serious career. Then came Grandma's 70th birthday. The entire family rented a banquet hall. Nearly 50 relatives showed up. Cousins, aunts, uncles, people I hadn't seen in years. Naturally, someone asked everyone to share what they'd been doing lately. Melissa couldn't wait. She stood up like she'd been preparing a presentation. She talked about market forecasts, quarterly reports, leadership seminars, corporate restructuring. Half the room looked confused. The other half clapped anyway. Then everyone's eyes landed on me. I kept it simple. Been expanding my business. Melissa laughed. What business? My agency. Oh, she smiled at everyone else. I always forget they call freelancing an agency now. Room went quiet. A couple people chuckled awkwardly. I took a sip of water before answering. We crossed 7 figures last year. Silence. Melissa blinked. In revenue? No, I smiled. Profit. You could have heard a fork hit the floor. One uncle nearly choked on his drink. My dad looked at me like he'd misheard. Even Grandma stopped eating. Melissa recovered quickly. Well, she forced a laugh. Money isn't everything. Interesting, considering she'd spent years using salary as the scoreboard. The conversation moved on, but for the first time. People started asking me questions, real questions. How many employees? How did the business start? What kinds of clients did we have? Melissa barely spoke for the rest of dinner. On the drive home, my dad called. "I had no idea your company was that successful." I laughed. "You never asked." He didn't have an answer. After that dinner, something changed. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. Relatives suddenly wanted business advice. Cousins started asking about internships. Even my stepmother stopped calling my job computer work. Melissa, though, she doubled down. Every success I had became luck. Every achievement had an excuse. Oh, the online industry is booming. Anyone can make money these days. You were just in the right place at the right time. I stopped correcting her. People who are determined not to understand usually aren't listening anyway. About 8 months later, everything changed. It started with a phone call from Dad. His voice sounded unusually careful. You heard about Melissa? No, her company is downsizing. Oh, eliminated her department. I genuinely felt bad. Losing a job is stressful no matter who you are. Dad sighed. She's taking it pretty hard. I hope she finds something soon. So do I. We hung up. I figured that would be the end of it. It wasn't, because 3 days later, Melissa texted me for the first time in almost 6 months, not to apologize, not to catch up, not even to ask how I was doing. Her first message simply said, "Hey, I think we should talk." And somehow, I already knew this conversation was going to be very different from everyone we'd ever had before. Melissa wanted to meet for coffee. Now, if you knew Melissa, you'd understand why that sentence alone made me suspicious. She didn't grab coffee. She scheduled networking opportunities. She didn't check in on people. She evaluated whether they were useful. So when she suddenly wanted to meet me one-on-one, my first thought wasn't that she missed me. It was that she wanted something. Still, I agreed, partly because I was curious, partly because I didn't want to hear from the rest of the family that I'd been unsupportive. When I walked into the cafe, she was already there. Designer handbag, perfect makeup, confident posture. If you didn't know she'd recently lost her job, you'd never guess. She smiled the moment she saw me. It's been forever. Funny, the last time we'd spoken in person, she'd spent 10 minutes explaining why real professionals didn't work from home. Now she was acting like we were old friends. I sat down. Have you been? She sighed dramatically. It's been a lot. Can imagine, she nodded. You know how companies are these days. I heard about the layoffs. They weren't fair. I believe it. For the next 20 minutes, she explained how management had made terrible decisions, how leadership had no vision, how people with less experience kept their jobs, how she'd been completely blindsided. I listened without interrupting, because losing a job really is difficult. Even if I hadn't always gotten along with her, I wasn't going to celebrate it. Eventually, she leaned forward. So, there it was. Been thinking. About? Your company. I stayed quiet. You said you've been growing. Have. You're hearing right? Sometimes, she smiled. I think I'd be a really valuable addition. I almost laughed, not because it was impossible, because the confidence was incredible. She hadn't asked what roles we had. She hadn't asked what skills we needed. She'd simply assumed there would be a place waiting for her. As what? She blinked. What do you mean? What position are you applying for? Oh, she waved a hand. Management, obviously. Obviously, she'd never worked in marketing, never managed creative teams. Never dealt with clients in my industry, but somehow she expected to skip straight into leadership. I kept my expression neutral. We don't really hire managers that way. Not, they're promoted internally. Her smile faded. But I already have management experience. Finance. Management is management. Really isn't. She crossed her arms. I think you're underestimating my abilities. I'm looking at experience. She looked genuinely offended. Supervised people. So have my department leads. They've also spent years learning this industry. She leaned back. I didn't realize you'd become so formal. This from the woman who once told me freelancing wasn't a real career. I smiled politely. It's just how we hire. She changed tactics. I could learn. I'm sure you could. So, we'd still start with the same hearing process as everyone else. Her eyebrows shot up, saying I'd have to interview. Yes, you wouldn't just hire me. No. A few seconds she simply stared, like I'd spoken another language, then she laughed. Joking. Not, we're family. So family should help each other. Interesting, I couldn't remember her saying that when she was making fun of my career every Thanksgiving. I didn't point that out. Instead, I asked a simple question. If our situations were reversed, she frowned. What? If you were still a finance manager and I wanted a leadership position at your company? She didn't answer. Would you have hired me? Silence. I didn't think so. She looked away. That's different. Just is. People usually say that when they don't have an explanation. She took a slow sip of her coffee. So what exactly are you offering? If you're interested, you can apply. What? We have an account coordinator opening. Her face fell immediately. That's entry level. Been managing teams. In another industry. It would still be a huge step backwards. It might. She looked almost insulted. I thought your company was doing better than that. It is. So why can't you create something? Because we don't invent jobs, she shook her head. I honestly expected more. I couldn't help smiling. You expected a management title. I expected respect. There it was again, respect. The same word she'd never once shown me when I was building this business from scratch. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. It was one of my project managers. A client had approved a major campaign we'd spent weeks preparing. I replied quickly. Melissa watched me. She looked around the cafe before lowering her voice. I really need this. The first time all afternoon. She sounded genuine, not confident, not sarcastic, just worried, and honestly, that made me feel for her. I knew what financial stress felt like. I knew what uncertainty felt like. I wasn't interested in getting revenge, but helping someone. Didn't mean pretending the past never happened. I looked at her and said, if you apply, I'll make sure your resume gets a fair review. She frowned. Just a fair review? That's what everyone gets. You can't do more. I won't. Expression hardened. So strangers get treated the same as family. I nodded. Exactly. She pushed her chair back. I can't believe this. I stayed calm. I can. She grabbed her purse. You know what? What? For someone who always wanted validation. She shook her head. You're enjoying this way too much. And she walked out without another word. People at nearby tables glanced over before going back to their conversations. I sat there for another minute, wondering if I'd been too harsh. Then I remembered every holiday, every joke, every time she'd reduced years of hard work to playing on a computer. No, I hadn't been harsh. I'd simply treated her exactly the way every other applicant would be treated. And somehow, that was the part she found unfair. What I didn't know was that the story wasn't over. Because less than a week later, my phone started exploding with calls from family members. And every single one of them had heard a very different version of what happened. The first call came from my stepmother. She didn't even say hello. I cannot believe how selfish you've become. I blinked. Good morning to you too. Melissa told me everything. That sentence explained a lot, because whenever someone starts with, I heard everything, they've usually only heard one version. What exactly did she tell you? That she asked for a chance and you humiliated her. I did. She said you laughed at her. Never laughed. Said you told her she wasn't good enough. Never said that either. My stepmother huffed. So she's lying? I think she's upset. Those aren't always the same thing. She kept going. You built this company and now you're acting like you're better than everyone. I stayed calm. I offered her the chance to apply. You should have hired her immediately. That's not how we run the company. Please. It's your company. It is, so make an exception. Explain that to the employees who worked for years to earn promotions. Silence then, family comes first. I heard that phrase so many times growing up that it almost sounded automatic. Funny how it usually appeared only when someone wanted a favor, not when they were making jokes at someone else's expense. After we hung up, I figured that would be the end of it. I was wrong. By dinner time, my phone looked like a group project I never agreed to join. An aunt texted me. A cousin sent a long voice message. Even an uncle I hadn't spoken to in nearly 3 years suddenly wanted to share his perspective. Apparently, the family version of the story was this. Melissa had humbly asked for a small opportunity. I had mocked her, bragged about my money, and told her she wasn't qualified to work for me. It was almost impressive. The truth had somehow turned into an entirely different movie. I ignored most of the messages, arguing with 10 people who already believed one side wasn't going to solve anything. Then Dad called. His voice sounded tired. Can we talk? Of course. He sighed before speaking. Melissa's having a rough time. I know. Your stepmother thinks you could have handled it differently. I treated her like every other applicant. I understand. But there was always a but. They're saying you embarrassed her. I leaned back in my chair. Dad. Yeah, if someone with zero experience in my industry asked for a management job, would you expect me to give it to them? No. If they were family, another pause. I guess, it's complicated. Isn't. He stayed quiet, then I asked something I'd wanted to ask for years. Did you ever notice how she talked to me? He didn't answer immediately. I thought it was just teasing. Wasn't. I know that now. That surprised me. You do. Been thinking about it. He sounded genuinely regretful. There were a lot of moments I should have stepped in. I didn't know what to say, because hearing those words years later didn't erase anything. But it did matter. A little. The conversation ended peacefully. For the first time in a long while, I felt like Dad was actually listening. I hoped that would calm things down instead. Things got worse. 3 days later, our HR manager knocked on my office door. You have a minute? Sure. She looked confused. We received an application. Okay, it's from Melissa. I nodded. I figured she might apply. There's something else. She handed me the printed resume. At first glance, everything looked normal. Then I noticed several things that made my eyebrows rise. Her resume listed experience she couldn't verify. It described responsibilities that sounded exaggerated. One section claimed she'd led nationwide digital marketing initiatives. She hadn't. She'd worked in finance. I looked at HR. Did she explain this? No. There are also references. I checked the names. None of them worked where she claimed they did anymore. One reference had retired years earlier. Another couldn't even be reached. HR folded her arms. What do you want us to do? The same thing we'd do for anyone else. Verify everything. Exactly. Days later, HR came back. Every concern had been confirmed. Several claims couldn't be verified. Dates didn't match. Job titles were inflated. One certification listed on the resume didn't exist. HR looked disappointed. We're rejecting the application. I nodded. Standard response. Exceptions? No exceptions. Hearing process existed for a reason. If I ignored obvious problems because she was family, I'd be asking every employee to lower their standards. That wasn't fair, not to them, not to future applicants. I assumed Melissa would quietly move on instead. She posted online, not mentioning my name directly, but anyone who knew us could connect the dots. Her post talked about successful people forgetting where they came from, about family choosing profits over loyalty, about people who pretend to support women until they're in charge. It got hundreds of likes, comments poured in. So true. Money changes people. You deserve better. Read it once, closed the app, and went back to work, because arguing in a comment section never changes someone's mind. But what happened the following Monday? That was something I never expected. One of my biggest clients emailed me asking if the rumors about my company were true, and suddenly, this wasn't just family drama anymore. Now it had the potential to affect the business I'd spent years building. The email arrived just after 9 in the morning. The subject line was simple. Quick question. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it. But when I saw who had sent it, my stomach tightened. This wasn't just any client. They'd been with us for almost 4 years. They trusted us with one of the biggest marketing budgets in our company. I opened the email. It read, "We've seen some comments circulating online about your company and wanted to check in before moving forward with our next campaign. We'd appreciate clarification." That was it. No accusations, no threats, just a question still. That question represented years of work. One careless rumor could undo trust that had taken a long time to build. I called my operations director into my office. "Seen the posts?" She nodded. A few employees mentioned them. "What do you think?" "I think they're vague enough that most people won't connect them to us." I hoped she was right. But if clients are asking, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I drafted a calm, professional reply. I explained that there was a personal family disagreement involving someone who had applied for a role. I reassured them that our hearing process was based on qualifications and was applied consistently to every applicant. No names, no personal details, no drama. Just facts. Within an hour, the client replied, "Thank you for clarifying. We appreciate your professionalism. Looking forward to launching the campaign." I leaned back in my chair and finally exhaled. Crisis avoided, or so I thought. That afternoon, my receptionist called my extension. "There's someone here asking to see you." "They have an appointment." "No, is it?" A brief pause. "Melissa," I closed my eyes for a second. "Tell her I'm in meetings." I already did. "And," she said, "she'll wait." Of course she would. An hour later, I walked out of a conference room and saw her sitting in the reception area. Several employees glanced over before quickly looking back at their computers. No one said anything, but everyone could feel the tension. I walked over. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk." "Could have done that over the phone." "You stopped answering." "Been working." She stood up. "You ruined my chances. My HR department reviewed your application. You told them to reject me." "They found problems." "They were being picky. They were doing their jobs." She lowered her voice. "You embarrassed me." "No, Melissa." I kept my tone even. "You embarrassed yourself when you submitted information that couldn't be verified." Expression changed instantly for the first time. She looked nervous. I may have worded a few things differently. "Your resume is supposed to be accurate. Everyone exaggerates. At our company." She folded her arms. "So that's it? You weren't rejected because you're my stepsister. You were rejected because your application didn't meet our hearing standards." She looked around the office. Employees were pretending not to listen, pretending no one was actually working. "You could have fixed it." "I shouldn't have to. We're family." There it is again. Time something goes wrong, suddenly family matters. She frowned. What is that supposed to mean? It means I don't remember family mattering when you spent years making jokes about my career. She opened her mouth, then closed it. You really held on to that. I almost laughed, held on to it. It wasn't one comment. It was years, years of holidays, years of little digs, years of being treated like the least successful person in every room. I moved on, I said, but moving on doesn't mean pretending it never happened. She looked away. I was joking. Because nobody else thought it was funny. She didn't answer. Instead, she tried a different approach. Apologized. I looked at her. No, I mean, I'm apologizing now. There it was, not a heartfelt apology, not an acknowledgement of specific things she'd done, just a sentence she hoped would unlock a job offer. I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings. That tiny word, if, did all the work. It turned accountability into a possibility instead of a fact. I smiled politely. Appreciate that. She waited. When I didn't say anything else, she frowned. That's all. What were you expecting? I apologized. You did. So, you'll reconsider. There isn't anything to reconsider. Her shoulders dropped. You really won't help me. I already did. She looked confused. I gave you the same opportunity every applicant receives. She shook her head slowly. Never thought you'd become this cold. I thought about answering. Instead, I simply said, I have another meeting. Then I walked back toward my office. Behind me, I heard her sigh loudly before leaving the building. By the next morning, everyone in the office had heard some version of what happened. Not because anyone gossiped, because offices are small worlds. People notice things. Around lunchtime, my HR manager stopped by again. I wanted to tell you something. What's up? I've worked in HR for almost 15 years. I nodded. And yesterday, she smiled. You did something a lot of business owners struggle to do. What? You kept personal relationships out of a professional decision. I shrugged. It wasn't easy. I know, your employees noticed. That surprised me. She continued. They've been talking. A bad way, the opposite. I raised an eyebrow. They said it made them trust leadership more. I hadn't expected that. Apparently, they saw something I hadn't to them. If I wouldn't bend the rules for my own family, then I probably wouldn't play favorites with anyone else. That realization stayed with me for the rest of the day. Because sometimes the hardest decisions are also the ones that quietly earn people's respect. I thought the situation had finally settled. I couldn't have been more wrong. Because 2 weeks later, I received an invitation to a family barbecue. And according to my cousin's text, Melissa had something important she wanted to say in front of everyone, given our history. I had a feeling this gathering was going to be anything but ordinary. The invitation sat in my inbox for almost a full day before I answered. Normally, I would have come up with an excuse: work, travel, a last-minute client meeting, anything. But this time, I was tired of avoiding family events because I didn't know what kind of comment would be waiting for me, so I replied with one word: be there. Saturday afternoon arrived. The barbecue was at my aunt's house, and by the time I pulled into the driveway, the backyard was already full. Kids were running through sprinklers. Someone was arguing over whose turn it was at the grill. Music played softly in the background. From a distance, it looked like every happy family gathering you've ever seen, until I spotted Melissa. She noticed me almost immediately. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she looked away. That was new. Usually she'd be the first person to make some clever remark. I greeted my grandparents, hugged a few cousins, and grabbed a drink to my surprise. Nobody brought up the job. Nobody mentioned the social media posts. It almost felt normal, almost. About an hour later, my aunt clinked her glass. Can I have everyone's attention for a minute? Conversations faded. People turned toward her. She smiled. Before dessert, Melissa wanted to say a few words. Every instinct told me this wasn't going to end quietly. Melissa stepped forward. She looked nervous, actually nervous. I'd never seen that before. She cleared her throat. Been doing a lot of thinking these past few weeks. No one interrupted. Blamed a lot of people for losing my job. She glanced around the yard. My old company. The job market. My family. Then she looked directly at me. But the truth is, she paused. I was angry. Another silence. I was embarrassed. I spent years believing my career made me more successful than everyone else. Several relatives exchanged awkward looks. I judged people based on titles, on offices, on salaries. She took a deep breath. I judged someone who had actually built something from the ground up. I could feel dozens of eyes shifting toward me. I made jokes. I dismissed your work. I acted like it wasn't real. She looked down. I was wrong. Yard was completely silent. Even the kids had stopped running around. She continued. When I lost my own job, I expected you to rescue me. I thought being family meant I'd automatically get a position. Another pause. When that didn't happen. I convinced myself you were the bad guy. She swallowed hard. But you weren't. I was. I honestly hadn't expected those words. Not in a million years. She turned fully toward me. I'm sorry. No excuses. If I hurt you, I did hurt you. I kept doing it for years. She nodded once. I don't expect forgiveness today. Just didn't want another family gathering to go by without telling the truth. When she finished, no one clapped, no one spoke. It was one of those rare moments where everyone understood that silence meant more than applause. Finally, my grandmother stood up. She walked over to Melissa and hugged her. Then she looked at me. I think it's your turn. I walked over slowly. Melissa looked like she was preparing for me to reject the apology instead. I smiled. Appreciate you saying all of that, she nodded quietly. Accept your apology. Eyes watered almost instantly. I continued. Accepting an apology doesn't erase the past. Just gives us a chance to build something better moving forward. She wiped at her eyes. I understand. For what it's worth. I smiled slightly. I really do hope you find a job that's right for you. This time, when I said it, I meant it, not because we were suddenly best friends, not because everything had magically healed, but because carrying resentment forever only weighs down the person carrying it. The rest of the afternoon felt lighter. People talked. They laughed. Nobody compared careers. Nobody kept score. Later that evening, as I was getting ready to leave, had stopped me by the gate. Proud of you, I smiled. For what? You had every reason to embarrass her. You didn't. I looked back toward the house. Melissa was helping clean up dishes with everyone else for once. She wasn't trying to be the center of attention. I wasn't trying to win, I told him. I just wanted peace, he nodded. I think you finally got it. A few months later, Melissa found a new position, not through me, not through family connections. She earned it on her own, and strangely enough, that was probably the best outcome for both of us. These days, when we see each other at family gatherings, we actually have conversations, real ones. Sometimes she asks how business is going. Sometimes I ask about her work. No sarcasm, no competition, just respect. It's funny how life works. The person who spent years saying my career wasn't real ended up teaching the entire family something far more valuable than any job title. Respect isn't given because of a paycheck. It isn't earned by having the fanciest office. And it definitely doesn't come from looking down on someone else's path. It comes from how you treat people, especially before you need something from them. And that's a lesson neither of us will ever forget.